Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today we're going to be doing the top 10 best returning running backs ahead of the 2025 UFL season. Now, we've done two of these before. We have done the wide receivers and quarterbacks, and this is a lot more similar to the quarterback one. For those of you who either don't remember or haven't watched those two yet, essentially the wide receiver rankings, the number 1 and the number 10 spot were relatively close in regards to how good of players we expect them to be, and they were last season, whereas the quarterback list, even as much as like number 3 to number 7, was a huge drop-off in regards of the overall level of talent and production that we saw this past season. So while yes, the wide receiver rankings, there were guys that were clearly high in that list and deserved to be, the difference was not too high from the top spots to the lowest spots, whereas the running backs is a lot like the quarterbacks, pretty big difference. To the point where the last couple of spots are pretty tough to fill out, and there's about like 3 or 4 different tiers of guys. So without further ado, let's get started with number 10, Day-Day Hunter of the Arlington Renegades. Now, this 10th spot was a really tough one, as it was pretty much between him and a couple other guys who showed potential but didn't necessarily play a full season. Day-Day came in about mid-season, played 3 games, ended up getting hurt in one of them, so he only, played in 3 games. Now, in those 3 games, despite not being the real starting running back, he ended up having 25 rushing yards a game, so nothing crazy, but again, when we're talking about these running backs, there is a pretty big difference overall when it comes to the guys on the top 10 list, right? So he gets the 10th spot because of the potential he had. He had a rushing touchdown. He did fumble the ball once in only 15 carries. He only had 1 reception for 9 yards. But I feel like this is somebody who didn't really even play 3 full games technically, and I feel like has a lot of potential to be a very solid running back. At least at the time of recording, and considering we're less than 20 days away from the season starting, does not look like De'Veon Smith is returning for the Renegades, meaning that Day-Day is going to get a lot more opportunities with this team this upcoming season. Going to be very interesting to see what he does, but I'm going to be putting him here. He did average like 5 yards a carry, which is very respectable, and is a huge reason why I'm putting him on this list at the number 10 spot. But again, didn't see enough of him to justify putting him higher on the list, but I just think he deserved a spot among those guys like a Larry Roundtree type of guy, somebody that didn't play a lot, showed potential, putting Day-Day here. Number 9, I'm going to go with Darius Higgins of the DC Defenders. Now, he is the last of these guys, or the first, I guess you should say, of these guys that ended up playing pretty much the whole season. Yes, he only was in 8 games. If he had played in all 10, he would have broke 200 yards. He did have over 200 total scrimmage yards. He only had 1 fumble. He did have a rushing touchdown. But the only issue that kind of puts him at this spot is the guys ahead of him are better running backs. They're just better. And the fact is that he kind of fits in this mid-ground of he was somebody that played a lot in his returning, which not many guys are in this kind of realm area, as well as the fact that the guys above him are just better than him. So number 9 is a pretty good spot for him. Again, DC is bringing back Abram Smith, who, if he's healthy, is going to be the number 1 back on this team. So Higgins is going to be, put down a little bit in the pecking order. He wasn't the starting running back with this team, right, of course, this past season, but he's not going to be this year. But he still showed some pretty good play, right? 171 yards. Did have a 3.6 yards per rush. Not the greatest ever, but nowhere near being a bad number. Again, it's just this couple of spots are pretty tough to determine. Really, once you get to the top, 7 guys, you start getting into the really good running backs. And so speaking of that, we'll just quickly go to number 8, and that is going to be TJ Pledger. Now, Pledger gets this spot mainly because he did just break into the top 25 scrimmage yards leader. He literally hit the 25th spot. He was 10th in rushing yards. He had the most rushing yards without a touchdown. Now, a lot of that is because when Mark Thompson did return, they used him a lot in those, short yardage situations where he ended up getting 5 rushing touchdowns despite not even playing, barely over half the season. So Pledger lost a couple of TD opportunities during that second half of the season. And the other thing that prevents him from being in that top 7 and why I'm saying that he is another one of those in his kind of own tier, he did have 3.3 yards per rush. That's not great, and it's not like he was like the 2 we're going to talk about in a second, where one of them may not have had that good of a rushing average either, was still really high in another stat. Pledger wasn't, so he's kind of in that weird middle ground area. I think he's going to be a very solid guy to bring back. There's a reason why he's one of the very few players that this team did bring back for this upcoming season. I think he's going to be solid, deserved to be this spot, so number 8, TJ Pledger. Now, number 7 and number 6, I'm putting as the Stallions RB duo of Ricky Person Jr. and CJ Marable. Yes, I said this was a lot like the quarterback ranking, and this is more proof of that. Yes, we're splitting these 2 spots. It's pretty difficult to argue one guy's better than the other. One of these guys has been a much more consistent performer, and CJ Marable's been doing it for 3 seasons. And in the postseason was insane. He was a slightly better rusher purely rushing in the playoffs than Person was. But during the season, Person ended up having 2 more rushing touchdowns. Did have only 1 more total, as Maribel did have a receiving one. With that being said, Person did have more receiving yards. It's just, this is a really tough one to call. Look, Person's biggest issue is the 3.2 yards per rush, but again, he was used in a lot of the short yardage situations. So, balancing it out, putting them together is a very justified spot. The running back position, despite the Stallions having 2 really solid running backs, neither of them are really elite by any stretch of the word. Maribel, again, has proven to be a consistently great running back at being a just always dependable guy. There's a reason why I think he's one of those sleeper candidates for the best USFL player in the ultramodern era, because in both seasons he was a really solid player and contributor, and then he carried that into this past season. It's a tough one. These 2 guys are both really good players. I just find that it's hard to really justify one or the other, because again, Maribel has always been a very consistent player. That rushing average is a big deal, but Person was able to get touchdowns, was really good in the playoffs as well. It's tough putting them together. I think this is a very solid spot for them both to be together at, this 6 and 7 area. I feel like the guy at number 5 has a lot more potential, though I know some would argue that guy should be at the 7. These 2 should move up a spot. And I think you kind of know where I'm going with this. Number 5, I'm going with Abram Smith, the DC Defenders. The wide receiver rankings, there was a couple guys who, because of injury, I was debating where to put them. This is different. Abram Smith clearly has to be on this list. Look, he missed the entire year from an ACL injury, and that's the reason why I'm dropping him all the way down to 5. Most people would have had him at like 1 heading into last season. He was the All-XFL running back in 2023, dominated the league. We're talking almost 800 yards, whereas nobody else even had 500. Even if you include Mark Thompson's 2023 season, Abram Smith just had an insane year, 7 touchdowns on the ground, add another 91 yards receiving. I mean, he was close to having 1,000 scrimmage yards. I mean, that's how insane he was. So, has to be on this list. Putting him at 5, why? The 4 guys above him were able to play this past season and play very, very good football. Abram Smith is coming off a major injury. I know he's not the only player that's coming off a major injury, but it's important to know that he's a running back. A knee injury to a running back is a really big deal. I mean, I don't think I have to explain why it's such a big deal. So I'm putting him at 5 because of that. Why am I putting him above the Stallions duo? Because if he comes back at like 70% of what he was, he'll be a better running back than either of them. That's what it comes down to. Abram Smith, the last time we saw him, was the best running back in his league. And it wasn't for Mark Thompson having that insane rushing TD total. We would have said by a mile he was the best in overall spring football. And even then, most people still viewed him as the best in spring football. He got injured, so we didn't get to see what he could do. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I think 5 is a good spot for him. The top 4 guys, I feel like, are clearly the 4 best running backs in the league, not counting Smith with injury. And so Smith gives him the 5 spot, just under those top 4 guys, but higher than the previous 5 guys we've mentioned. So I feel like this is a solid spot for him. Number 5 for Abram Smith. Now, number 4 is going to be John Lovett and Matt Colburn, as well as the 3 spot. This was another one that was just really tough to call. When you look at their stats, they're just insanely close in every single stat. I mean, when you're talking about their scrimmage yards total are differed by 4, you know what I mean? They were both really solid. One of them had 1 more rushing touchdown, but he fumbled. Matt Colburn never fumbled. So, edge Colburn. Colburn did have a higher yards per rush, but at the same token, John Lovett was playing on a team that kept changing running backs. Colburn, once Hills went down, was really the guy. Both of them didn't play in 2 games, so they didn't have a full season between them. You know what I mean? These both would have had over 500 scrimmage yards. Both were insanely close. It was just tough to call. So I'm putting him here. Colburn had higher yards per reception. That's a solid one, but it's just, this is too close to call again. Yes, I know some people would argue that Colburn was better, considering just overall how a certain other player on the Brahmas is going to be higher on this list. You probably know where he's going to be ranked on this list. So you could argue, well, Lovett got that benefit. At the same token, that kind of hurts him because he's in a 2-back system. Same issue with Maribel in Person, but I think there's a solid spot for the 2 of them. Colburn had a really great year this past season when Hills went down and he already was playing solid again. Both these guys missed a couple of games if they played a full season. Tough one to move. Both these guys were high up in a lot of stats, rushing yards, rushing totals, or rushing touchdowns, I should say. Yards per rush, both over 4, so really solid in that stat, which is a big deal. Remember that 4 yards per rush is a huge deal because that means 2 rushes gets you 8 yards. You only need 2 for a first down, you know what I mean? So, number 3 and 4, John Lovett and Matt Colburn. Then number 2, obviously, is Anthony McFarland. Some might say this is a bit premature. I don't really think so. Yes, I get it. He had a lot of yards from deep plays, but that kind of says how insane he is. I mean, 242 yards after catch compared to 206 receiving yards. You can kind of tell that sounds insane until you realize what yards after catch is. He's insane. Look, he was able to take multiple screen short passes deep for huge shots. He was somebody that in the playoffs had the most rushing yards in the entire postseason. He was tied for 8th in receiving TDs. He was one of those 3 touchdown guys. Did have a rushing touchdown, and he only played half the season. In half the season, he had just under 400 scrimmage yards. He plays a full season like this, he hits 800 more than likely. So if you're talking about a guy who could have had 800 yards in scrimmage, I mean, come on. Are you serious? And he continued it in the playoffs. He was one of, if not the best overall performing Brahmas player in the playoffs. So it's pretty hard to argue him not being here. Again, half the season, he was almost top 20 in scrimmage yards, and he was top 15 in rushing yards. He has to be on here. When he was hurt and playing banged up or not playing, it was a big deal. It's just a huge reason why I still think the Brahmas are going to be good. I guess slight spoiler for whenever I do my predictions for the season. A big reason I think the Brahmas are going to be fine despite having a very poor QB room is because these 2 running backs, McFarland and Lovett, are just insane of a duo. So because of that, putting him at number 2, it's just obviously he's not number 1 because number 1 proved what he could do across the entire season, whereas McFarland could be that, there just wasn't enough film on him, but we'll see. But number 1 is Jacob Sailors of the St. Louis Battlehawks. Talked about it before, and I'll keep talking about it. Easily the best running back in the league this past season. Deserved the All-UFL honor for the running back position. The only guy to get it. Had the most rushes without a fumble in the entire league. Was tied for 4th in scrimmage yards. Tied 2nd in rushing touchdowns. Had the most rushing yards among all running backs. I mean, come on. 4.9 yards per rush. Of all the running backs in the top 20 of rushing yards, that was the highest, if I'm not mistaken. Only quarterbacks were ahead of him. It's just, who else are you putting at number 1 in this list? Seriously. I mean, when I talked about Abram Smith coming back at 70%, he comes back at 70%, he's not as good as Jacob Sailors. If Sailors comes back and does what he did last season, it's going to take Abram Smith being basically fully healthy or 95% healthy from what he was to compete for the title of best running back in the league. Sailors was incredible. Remember, this is a team that had Wayne Gallman be signed to them, and a lot of people were like, oh, this is a guy who was a really solid player in the NFL for that 1 or 2 seasons. He's going to be a great running back for them. And Sailors just dominated that position and was the clear-cut best running back on the team. 150 yards receiving, 23 receptions, 160 yards after catch. So again, McFarland was taking those deep screens and going past the line of scrimmage and getting good yardage. He only had a long of 19. That shows that he's getting multiple solid screen plays. He's not just taking one to the house or something. So when you combine the fact that he had really good yak, really good rushing yards per attempt, and just overall cumulative stats like yards, touchdowns, who else are you going to put? He had 8 total touchdowns. I mean, come on. He was the best running back in the league this past season. Easily deserves this spot in this list. Number 1, Jacob Sailors, best returning running back in the league. So that'll do it. This has been Zon Fox. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. We're getting closer and closer to the UFL season starting. Again, we're getting 15 days away at this point. It might even be less when I'm posting this video. Well, it's posting on Friday, but we're really close. We're 2 weeks away from the season starting. It's insane to think about that, but it's true. So again, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We're doing multiple videos every single week. In terms of pure videos, we're doing 4 a week. We're doing a short every week, multiple live streams a week. It's going to be great. If you've been a fan of the channel for a while, think about becoming a community member for 99 cents a month is the lowest amount. You get an exclusive monthly video about a non-UFL sports league. You get access to 6 team emojis currently, potential spoilers to future videos, and a lot of other things. And as always, guys, have a great night.